All right. Hi, Suraj. It's wonderful to see you again after all these years. How are you?
Likewise, I'm great. I'm very good. How you doing, Russ?
I'm doing excellent. I think, like I just told you, I've been watching a little bit of your career and your path through tech and through VC and building, actually solving some of the toughest challenges in product. I think, which had a lot to do with building platforms for communities, which is something that
Hmm.
we at A Teams actually care about a lot. Because the first thing we did as we built the company is try to build a category and a community that we felt was missing. And that is the category of the highly skilled tech professionals that are looking to do work that they care about with the people they like on their own terms. And as part of that work, we are interviewing, sharing the stories, the lesson learned, the challenges of some exceptional people like yourself across different disciplines in tech, um, and kind of highlighting and learning from their journeys and disseminating that information to our community and people outside of it that we feel are really looking for role models and kind of inspiration. So, all right, let's dive right in. So, Suraj, I met you when you were, I believe, at the very fancy VC firm, their Hippo in New York. Is that right?
I think that's right. I think that's when we met. Yeah.
So, how the hell did you end up there? Can you like walk us back a few years back? Like,
Uh,
how did
that's a
you end
good
up there?
question. You know what? It was just a series of sort of random events, honestly. It was never planned, obviously. Like everyone I've ever met in VC never intends to be in VC. They just kind of fall into it, and that was so true with me. I mean, to backtrack probably like 5 years before I started at Lyra, I worked in advertising at the time. That was my first profession after college, and I never really loved what I did. And it took me a bit of time to realize that. And at that time, there was a wave of the first tech companies happening in New York, and just inside me there is an entrepreneur. I've always known that, and I thought I just saw that as an opportunity to try and build a company. So I took that opportunity. I met a co-founder. We started a company together. It was an online fashion company called Look Lab. Raised some capital, and it was a 4 year journey of just trying to build a company for the first time, not knowing what it really took, not knowing what code was, not knowing what the basics of product management or design or really any of the fundamentals that you would assume someone starting a tech company would know. And probably after like the third of those 4 years, I kind of took a step back and admitted to myself for the first time. I kind of had that internal conversation that things weren't working. It should have been a lot quicker than taking 3 years for me to have that conversation. But I realized things weren't working, and I think one of my challenges was that I didn't know how to code, and it felt very problematic at the early stage of a tech company. I almost felt like I felt like an imposter. Um, and so I paused the company, spoke to my investors, and I was like, look, I just want to teach myself to code so I can rebuild this company. So I spent a year teaching myself Udacity 101, the intermediate course, the advanced course, doing basically just trying to figure out what I could build using Python. I learned a bit of front end as well. And I just really started to enjoy that. And I think I also admitted to myself that my company really wasn't going to make it. And this just programming felt like a more, a more interesting path for me. It felt right. So I continued to code. I went to Recurve Center, which is at that time was called Hacker School, which is it's not a I sort of call it a boot camp for engineers, but it's not how they describe it. It was a 3 month course. We spent a bit of time, or I spent a bit of time just sort of hacking on different ideas, and I finished that. And I was looking for a job in engineering. That's really what I was looking to do, like as a junior engineer. And someone just sent me this job description, which was super strange. It was working at a VC, but it was being an entrepreneur, knowing how to design, knowing how to do UX, knowing how to write code. And I was like, you know what? I'll just go for it. Why not? I had no intention of going to VC. It's not something I really even wanted to do, frankly, because I enjoy building things, and I didn't see myself at a VC. But the job description sounded fantastic, and I met with Lyra, and within 2 weeks I got a job offer.
Wow.
It was incredible.
All right, this is an unbelievable way of getting into VC, and Lyra Hippo for one. And I want to get to it, but just I'm intrigued by the first jump, the first leap of faith that you did. So you were working in advertising, you had a degree in that area, you spent many years. Where were you at the time, by the way? Where in the world were you at the time?
So I was at Young and Rubicam for 2.5 years, and then a smaller agency called Nadine Johnson. So
and that was in the US?
That was in New York, yeah.
In New York. So you're basically living the life in some of the best advertising agencies. You studied for it. You were in New York, probably like things were working out well. And why the hell did you were like, hey, you know what? I'm just going to quit that amazing job and just go to a startup. And by the way, I have no idea what that even means. Like, what was that?
Yeah, it was scary. It was scary. I remember having conversations with people. I remember meeting with entrepreneurs and telling them what I was doing. I remember telling my friends what I was doing. And everyone thought I was crazy, and I felt sort of crazy. But I just knew deep down what I enjoy doing, and I've always wanted to build something. Always.
What is that? What was that thing that you felt that you really enjoyed doing that prompted you to put all this behind and kind of jump into the abyss?
Yeah, I think it just goes back to doing the things that give you energy in life. Like, that's kind of how I frame it in retrospect. It's not how I saw it then, but it was, I mean, we've all been at jobs where we get up and we just don't want to go to work. And that's just not a way to live for me. And I felt like that, just to be very candid. And just the idea of doing something that was unknown, that could result in success or failure, but just was something that would make me try and create an entity, an organization that could provide value for other people, was just an exciting journey. And I really like the idea of trying it. And I am impulsive, like that, you know, that is something that people have told me, and I know that about myself, but it was just one of those moments. And I mean, as soon as I started, it was such a big challenge, but I loved it. It was so much harder. And obviously I had no money, and I'm living in New York. I couldn't afford my apartment. I was living on a couch, but I just loved it. I didn't care. And that to me was a sign. You know, I was working twice the hours I was working in advertising. I was getting paid less than half, actually nothing, before I got investment. But I enjoyed it, and I didn't.
That's interesting. That reminds me of, you know, there's this. I think it was just a few days ago. I read an article about Tim Cook from Apple, who was saying that, you know, when people say do something you love and you never work a day in your life, and he's like, I'm calling bullshit on that. Like everything, like good things are worth working for, and they're usually a lot of work. And I think in my experience, I think that I don't think there's a worse job than starting a company or going out on your own. Like, it's literally the most painful and excruciatingly so. But I couldn't imagine myself do anything else, because I also love it. And I find that the way I rationalize it is that everything that we try to create is going to be hard, whether we do it at a company, for ourselves, for other people, for whatever it is. It's always going to be hard because there's friction for things not to change. And I think it's what we're seeing today, like globally, right? For things to change, you have to break things. Like, there's friction, there's like challenges to go through. And so anyway, it's hard. So might as well do it for something that you have, like you said, and I very much relate to what you said, like what gives you energy, because that's what unlock someone to really pull things out of themselves that is sometimes even greater than they could ever imagine having. So I respect that. I admire that. I think it's crazy and it's amazing. And you did that for 4 years, but now I understand that you were like, wait, you know what? It's not enough risk. Let me just like jump to this other career where now I'm going to become an engineer. Is that what happened? Okay, it's completely
kind
nuts.
of, yeah. But it was the same. It was the same mindset, frankly.
Right.
You know, it was, this is not this is not working. Like, I, you know, when I was building my company, I think one of the biggest mistakes that I made was that I spent too long on it. But as soon as I found engineering and just learning Python, learning the nuts and bolts of programming, and it started to make sense, it felt so immensely powerful to me. But I also think that life is a journey, and it's part of your duty to embrace that. And whatever you do has a cost. You may not realize the cost at that point, but in retrospect, you will. And I think it's important to acknowledge that. So sure, the cost at that point may have been greater, but I think in retrospect, it's a lot less, because learning to be an engineer is a fantastic career, frankly. So that's
Interesting
how I started
perspective.
to look at things.
So you're almost saying, tell me if I understood you correctly. You're saying like, embrace the fact that life is a journey, zoom out to have perspective. The cost that you see today is only one part of the equation, because the benefit is something that will kind of unroll itself over many years.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, like hypothetically, I could have wound down my company and gone back into advertising, which is what people were telling me to do. And I could still be in advertising 10 years later, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But from my perspective, there would be a lot wrong with that, from my personal perspective, because it's just not what I enjoyed.
That's really interesting. So you started with, just out of my sheer curiosity, you started with Python, you said? That's what you chose? Yeah. And what tool did you use to learn? You said Udacity? Was there some other things?
I did Udacity 101. It's when they first launched the 101 course, and it was free. And that was a godsend for me, because it was free and I couldn't afford anything. And then after that, they launched the second intermediate course. So yeah, it was Python.
That's interesting. I wonder if you feel that learning to code has impacted the way you do things outside of actually coding software.
Oh yeah, I mean, hugely. I think fundamentally, one of the things about learning to code is that it's taught me to break things down into break big problems down into very granular problems. And I think just having that skill has enabled me in so many other aspects of my life.
Interesting. How did you, clearly it wasn't the fact that you were the most experienced engineer. And, no. and definitely you have some product. I know this about you. You've got some amazing product instinct and so forth. But truly, like, how do you get the firm to put their trust in you in building something that I don't think you could really look at other VCs and be like, oh, I'm just going to copy what they built? Because I know the VC world a little bit. Pretty much like the very few VCs who even today in 2020 haven't really built that type of software as a service for their portfolio companies. So like, what it is in that interaction you had with them that made everyone take the leap?
Yeah, I think it was also just because I had come off the back of being a founder for 4 years. I think that there was a lot of empathy for that. And, you know, Lyra is, I think, a strong VC because they have a lot of founder empathy. And I told them a lot about my experience about that, about some of the problems that I had as a founder, what would be helpful for me. So I think having that perspective as an engineer, as someone that can help find what these pain points could be, was valuable to them. So I think it was the experience of being a founder as well as also being able to write a bit of code here and there.
I have a hard time imagining you an employee. Like basically the exact opposite. And a job at a VC is not a typical employee job either, as we both know. So I'm just wondering how that was from that perspective.
I think one of the challenges, and I think you probably have this, and all entrepreneurs have this, is that we are slightly contrarian.
Slightly.
Because, yeah, just slightly, so that, and, you know, when, I can always feel that side of me as well when I want to like change what I'm working on or how I'm working. And I think that's sort of the challenge with a company that's becoming big, is that you are entering into that world where you're going from startup to something that's a little more corporate. And that's tough for me, just because I am independent. I have this weird thing where I can't sit at a desk for too long. It sounds ridiculous, but I literally cannot sit at a desk for too long. I move a lot, I pace, I walk, I like to talk to people. And it's just not conducive to like a 9-to-5 job. I don't know. It's a weird thing. It's a problem that I have.
So what are you up to these days?
So I mean, after in end of 2018, I left Way Up, and I didn't really have a plan. I didn't want to work full time. I wanted to travel a bit. I just felt a little burnt out. You know, after all those three back-to-back roles, I felt exhausted, frankly, and I wanted to give myself a bit of a break. So I packed up my bags. I wanted to also leave New York, and I traveled for a bit. I just wanted to sort of explore, see what would happen. I took up yoga. I trained as a yoga teacher as well in 2018 and 2018 because I enjoyed it. And I went to Indonesia for a couple of months just to practice out there and live that kind of life. And then I was
Yeah.
just figuring out where I wanted to be next. I didn't really have any agenda.
So do you do any kind of software type work these days, or where's your mind at?
So I've been consulting primarily as a product manager.
Mm-hmm.
I'm currently also an EIR, an entrepreneur resident at Nike. So it's a slightly different role than a product manager, but it's mostly product management.
So are you juggling a few right at a time, or you kind of pick one thing? And how do you even look for the engagements and kind of customers you want to work with? How does that look like?
Yeah, I maximum I'll have 3 clients at once. For me personally, I can't context switch more than that. And you know, as a consultant, there's a lot of additional work that goes into that, just admin and all that kind of stuff. So maximum 3 clients. And it's really just through referrals and my network in VC. That's really what's helped me.
Have you ever done a project that you felt gave you as much as you gave to the project?
I mean, I have been working on with an enterprise company based in London, and just helping them with their reorganization and because you know they raised a round of funding and they just sort of they had challenges just not knowing how to organize themselves from a product perspective. So just putting that into place and then seeing them run in sprints and seeing them actually build product with less friction, that to me was super rewarding. And one of the things I love to do, and I get very nerdy about this as well, is just understand managerial processes. It's for whatever reason, it's super fascinating to me. Because
it's
you
like
know,
the design of people, systems of people.
It's a design of people. It's the design of a company. And what I've realized is that design is so embedded in the success of your product, and we don't realize it. And you don't realize it when you build a product in the first place because you don't have that in place. But when you start to hire a team, when you have people and you have to organize them, you have to really think about what is the structure of that, because you want to keep on creating that repeated value. And that process of building that organization and making sure it's efficient, making sure it's running, making sure it has all the user insights still being funneled into it. That to me is super fascinating.
That's an amazing insight, actually. Now you make me think of this. It's like we don't even think about it, about the system of people and how they interact and how much influence it has on how much impact it has on the product until it's become a really big problem. Like when you hire a lot of people, you have money, you're like, oh, I guess I should think about my organizational design.
And you know, the best thing that I think a founder can do is really open themselves up to learning from other founders and other leaders who they respect and they know, and also be open to doing it from other fields, like you said. Because we're all learning together. Like no one has figured this out. You know, it's a challenge for even the best companies.
To finish that, maybe I'd love to ask you if you have thoughts or tips or a little bit of guidance on people who find themselves exactly in your station, which in the sense of they have an array of skills. They like employing them in different use cases. They want to go at it on their own, whether it's building a company or working with different type of customers. Like we know it's a life that's in many ways atypical and a little bit challenging and less charted. What worked for you? What you find is challenging and you haven't found solutions for? What tips and guidance you would have for people like you across product engineering, etc., that are in a similar situation?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I'm still learning. I think one of the important things for me is, well, there are a few things. One is knowing how to sell yourself. I think that you know, if you're an engineer or you're a product person, you have all these amazing skills, but you don't necessarily know how to package them up and put them in front of people and talk about them. And I didn't know that either, frankly, when I started out. I didn't really know how a product manager as a consultant would work with a startup. But I figured it out quickly. So when you start to have conversations, you learn. So one piece of advice is just understand how to sell yourself. Understand, you know, where your strengths are and how to package that up. And then I think also to work with clients and customers that give you energy, that you enjoy working with. It's a challenge in the beginning because you're going to be looking for work, but once you set that up, I think that is important. And I also think it's important to align with the values of the customers that you work with, because you are building a product with them and you are part of their team and you want to give them good work. So you have to align on those values on sort of cultural standpoint. Otherwise, I don't think
that's a very interesting point. So I really appreciate that guidance. I really appreciate it. And you're right about the practice, like figuring out, we all have a story. We have actually many stories, right? Many aspects of them, of that story, and practicing and thinking through what it looks like in a way that has always been a challenge for me, because I always felt not authentic practicing a story.
Right.
But I understand that that's just a mental block that I have, but it's bullshit. Like we really, like, you're absolutely right. It requires, that's maybe why it requires practice.
Yeah, and I think just to add to that, maybe it's not actually just even practicing it, it's just realizing you have a story. I didn't realize I had a story. As I said, I felt like a jack of all trades until I started being asked about my professional experiences. And then I realized I did actually have a story. I just didn't realize that I did.
I'm also curious about the work with people who you feel kind of align with your values and so forth. Like, that sounds good. And frankly, we try to do this, right? When we talk to companies, we're like, okay, what do they really stand for? Like, what do they care about? But how do you do that? Like, it's actually very hard.
Well, I think it's a good question to ask people when you start working with them. You know,
oh, you
like,
really just ask?
Yeah, I was like, you know, and this is something that I've read a lot about, and I think a lot about, are like, what are the cultural values of a company from the very beginning? And more founders are putting emphasis and thought into that, which I think is a really good thing. Because when companies scale and they don't have values, they become very sort of disorganized, and there's no North Star. And you can see that in some companies. I mean, there are examples of that.
Wait, so when you went with Nike, you asked them, what are your values?
Yeah, we talked. Well, I mean, they have very explicit values that they actually shared with me. So I didn't even ask them. We just talked about them.
Wow. Okay, that's strong.
Yeah, and that was really important to me, and I know that because, you know, I've had a fantastic experience working with them so far. And I think they've been true to all those values, and it helps. I think it helps with their hiring process, but also their hiring process is me, right? Like, they have found me because I align with their values, and they align with mine.
That's true. I really like this, especially I see that. I mean, there are people who now feel okay leaving jobs, high-paying jobs at that, because they realize that just doesn't align with their values. And I find this amazing, and in a way, the greatest evolution. Like, there's a lot of negative things about us as a society coming to life this year. There's one thing that's very positive in my mind, is that we finally reached a stage where more of us, and thankfully, have the luxury or the courage, which to me is a theme of your story, the courage to basically say, no, it does not align with what I stand for.
One thing I was going to add to that is, you know, you will ask a company why they built what they've built. And I think that is a very telling way of learning what their values are. Yeah, it can be a whole range of things, but, you know, I find myself now gravitating towards companies that have a very strong social angle because of what's happening. And there are more of those companies out there, and there are reasons people are starting those. And those companies are going to start attracting more and more talent because of values. And if you don't have values, or if you haven't thought about them, or they're not important to you, you're going to start losing talent. It won't happen immediately, but it's going to happen over time. So to that point, you know, it shouldn't be treated as a strategy. It should be treated as a right for a company, because, you know, companies are seen as ways to make money, but they have a social role. And I think we are starting to realize that. And I think it's important that any company that is being born or is existing right now really truly deeply thinks about what they like, how they want to represent themselves in a holistic sense, like what they put out into the world, how they treat their employees, all those sorts of things. So to that point, you know, you look at a product, you look at the hiring process, you look at the employees that work at a company, there are so many signs as to what the values of a company are.
Noted. I literally had to take notes while we're speaking, because this is great. And this is super helpful and super practical. And I see how I will be implementing some of those findings and insights into my work. And I believe many more people as well. Yeah, this is very powerful. Suraj, this has been amazing. Thank you for the dosage of inspiration, for the inspiration, for having enough courage to jump into the abyss, take a leap of faith, faith on yourself, not being able to be pinned down by anyone or anything truly, and always thinking about how you can do better and greater. It's just incredibly inspiring. I'm humbled by listening to your story. Thank you for these insights and guidelines. And I hope to continue this conversation.
No, likewise. And thank you so much for the opportunity, and thank you so much for making me part of this community. I think it's awesome, the work that you're doing.
So glad you're with us. All right, Suraj, we'll chat more later.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Sounds good.